I want to mention now, introduce you to our panelists. I think you can see their pictures up right now. How wonderful. Let me introduce one at a time, and we're going to take questions from everybody. We already have some people writing in some really great questions, but let me introduce first Dr. Brian Lim. Hi, Brian. Glad you could be with us. And Dr. Lim is a local boy, born and raised on Oahu. He graduated from Hawaii Baptist Academy, woohoo! Studied psychology at Wheaton College and studied for his doctorate at Fuller Theological Seminary. He's licensed to practice psychology in Hawaii since 2005, and he has specialty training in the treatment of post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, which we're going to talk about tomorrow a bit more, and the integration of Christian issues such as forgiveness and reconciliation, so important, emotional concerns. He has a very strong interest in moods and anxiety disorders, couples, marital therapy, interpersonal communication, stress, and anger management. As a Christian and as a clinical psychologist, he's passionate about seeing people grow in healing and freedom through encounters with truth and grace. And Dr. Lim is the clinical director of Paradigm Hawaii Counseling in Kailua, and that's where he practices. So again, aloha, Brian, glad you are with us. And these are my friends, by the way, so nice to have the buddies with us for tonight. And then Shea Nakamoto, who was with us last night, but for that 17% who just joined us tonight. Shea has an MS and a marriage family therapy degree, license here, practicing in Kaka'ako and Aiea. And before moving back home here to Hawaii to open up her practice, Shea worked as a therapist in the Los Angeles County. That can be a tough area for many reasons, helping mothers recovering from drugs and alcohol, and children coping with exposure to trauma, and family members struggling with mental illness. Shea also studied at Fuller Theological Seminary in the School of Psychology in California, Pasadena. She was trained to guide individuals and families and couples through change, and hopefully through help and healing. And in fact, 1 year into her return to her hometown, Shea has a heart to bring all of her training to families living in Hawaii. So yay, Shea, great to have you with us. Aloha. Okay, so we have some great questions, and we'll start off maybe with you, Shea, to get things warmed up, and then Brian, you can jump in and give your thoughts on it too. But the first question from somebody who's written in, if a person has been in a depressive state for a long time, is it harder for that person to recover to a normal state?
Well, first of all, Dan, just thanks for the opportunity to be here. I'm just so happy to be able to help people, and just so thankful for Dr. Stanford's talk. So definitely the time that somebody has been struggling with depression could make an impact on their treatment. But I would say treatment is depression is very manageable, right? And so really the consistent participation in treatment with therapy or medication is very important. So not to lose hope in the fact that depression can be managed.
Great. Brian, do you want to jump in on that one?
Yes, excuse me. Yeah, thank you. Thank you also for having me, Dan, and for your reply there, Shea. I would definitely agree. I think that depression is a very treatable condition. In fact, it's known as kind of the common cold of mental illness. And I think of it, we often think of a cold as a head cold. Like Dr. Stanford said, it's definitely involving the brain and also the mind. And so the mind is the area that I'm particularly interested in. And I think that especially using the cognitive behavioral therapy techniques that Dr. Stanford referred to, much can be done. And the duration of the depression can certainly make a difference. I mean, if a person has been dealing with a long-term struggle, it could take a while for certain things to shift. In my experience, though, I do think that if something clicks for somebody, that can make a big difference. And so there's a lot of reason to believe that it will not have to be sort of the same amount of time that they've been depressed that would take to actually have the treatment go forward so they felt better.
Thanks, Brian. Good word. Next question is, and I mentioned we have teenagers and youth in this, and I'm not sure what the age is of this person asking the question, but what are the best ways I can approach my parents to tell them about my mental health situation? Shea, you want to take a swing at that one?
First of all, just for that person to recognize that they have mental health conditions, that's pretty brave and very astute of them. So that's wonderful. I guess my best, guidance would be to just be very honest and direct and simple, and to keep things very calm, and just to put it out there that you've maybe seen Dr. Stanford's talk, and realizing that maybe you struggle with some of those things too. But appreciate that person's bravery and not having any shame around that, and asking for help is always the first step. So that would be my encouragement.
Yeah. Anything you want to add to that, Brian?
I would definitely echo your point there, Shea, about using this particular presentation as a potential springboard for talking with your parents, because you may be actually opening up a very important discussion, not just for your parents, but maybe for your family. I would certainly commend you for your courage as well, and would want to maybe just say, be open to what your parents have to say. Consider what they may not necessarily be as responsive as you would hope, but that doesn't have to mean that it's now that you're not going to be able to have your goal accomplished. I think every little bit counts, and that's an important detail, I think, when it comes to our recovery, is we want to celebrate every bit of progress that we can make. So another last thing you might consider is actually writing out your response, your questions for your parents, or what you want to say. It helps to kind of get it pre-thought out, and there's more than one reason why we say the pen is mightier than the sword. So what I would say.
And then again, that question, I don't know if that's coming from a younger person or older person, but here's one from a parent. Sometimes abandonment issues can cause depression or loneliness. And a parent's asking, how do you support your adult child dealing with her husband being apart on purpose, not because they're sent away for business or military, but purposely not wanting to be around? So what are the right or wrong things to say to that adult child to help bridge that situation?
Okay, well, I think what I would want to consider is that the separation might be very intentional, and what we might consider a therapeutic or a healing separation, and it might be time constrained and just very intense. They may be doing it in conjunction with their own counseling. I do think that it would be important not to say things that would potentially shame them or cause them to feel like they were failing. If anything, if they're separating intentionally, that would seem to me like they're actually trying to make this marriage work. And then I guess you probably want to have to find out more information as they might be comfortable sharing to be able to further attend to the situation.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. We had heard in Dr. Stanford's talk the phrase electroconvulsive therapy, and to treat depression. In your understanding, whether through those you work with or anecdotally with other people, how effective is electroconvulsive therapy in treating depression?
I bet Brian has more information on this, but from my understanding, that's something you turn to when it's a very, very chronic depression, kind of a last resort. And Brian, correct me if I'm wrong. So it's only after sort of repeated, you know, attempts to try medication and different medications, talk therapy, combinations of both those things. So by the time we're using electroconvulsive therapy, it's after a long time. And I don't have any information. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and I think the person's asking, is it effective? You know, and I'm not sure about percentage or success rate, but you know, what has research shown? And I like what you said, Shea, that it's in conjunction with other methods. But Brian, do you have any of the people you work with have had that, and how successful has it been?
You know, I don't have anybody that's coming to mind who has undergone electroconvulsive therapy. I have heard good things about the transcranial magnetic stimulation. You know, from tuning stuff on. There's this person named David Carrion. He's a psychiatrist out of Stanford who speaks highly of the TMS, and I've been kind of enjoying. He's a Christian psychiatrist who's kind of doing something similar to this, talking about how are we coping with mental health during the pandemic and stuff. So definitely a great resource to know about. Kind of, I think, a well-kept secret at this point, but he's mentioned, I think he does do some TMS stuff. He also mentioned, I think, that the ECT facilities, maybe through Stanford, were actually affected by the shutdowns up in California, so maybe not as accessible. But my understanding is it is effective for people who don't benefit from conventional treatments such as psychotherapy and medication.
Great. Well, let me switch topic here. Dr. Stanford mentioned, and I thought it was so helpful, that it's okay to talk to people about they might have some suicidal thoughts, and it doesn't curse them or plant the seed in their mind. And I thought that was so helpful to hear. And then he had kind of a checklist kind of to walk through in your mind how to help somebody. And somebody's asking a very thoughtful question. You know, with those questions like, do you have a plan? How do you ask them in a culturally appropriate way, especially here in Hawaii? Either one of you want to have an answer for that?
Well, that's a very good question. I think, you know, just the fact that they're asking, how do I be attuned culturally, says something about their awareness to really praise. It might depend on the culture. You know, certain cultures, for example, I mean, I don't want to stereotype, but let's say you're dealing with a culture that actually might value suicide. You know, there are certain cultures that's kind of the honorable way to end things, and so I think it would be important to consider, you know, is this person thinking that they're somehow, you know, doing something that would actually bring honor to their family or something of the sort. I think what I would also say, though, is we would want to be, I think it's important to be aware of whether the person is feeling either hopeless or like a burden. Those are some particular flags, I think, to look out for. That's not good when somebody is feeling like people would be better off without them. And in particular, I think it's not good because I don't think it's true. But unfortunately, when a person is feeling like they are very, very, you know, without reason for living or for hope, then it can almost seem to them like they're doing somebody a favor. And so I would want to, you know, attend to the fact that they're trying to help, but then I would also want to draw out their value, and that'll take time. But I think that's an approach that I would really want to consider. How can I affirm even them being in the conversation with me, and how can we also consider how they, you know, the biggest problem with suicide is that this world doesn't get to have you in it, and you don't get to be in it. This world is no longer going to be blessed by you. And I think we want to draw out the fact that this person is vital to their community.
I'll add to that just a bit. That was great. That was great, Brian. I think no matter the culture, just to emphasize the non-judgment part of addressing suicidal thoughts, and to be as accepting and as of whatever. Suicidal people often feel like they have no other option, and so we don't want to judge how they come to that conclusion, but we just want to be as open and non-judgmental as possible, while taking into account their culture. So I appreciated Brian's word.
And let me ask this, and I'm going to combine two questions into one that have come in. Do you think we're more depressed in this generation versus past ones? And then to kind of piggyback on that, are there studies that point to social media or computer use in general as a factor in depression? So that's kind of a trait of the present generation. But what do you think? Has it always been about the same rate, or do studies show there's actually an increase in depression right now?
Something I hear a lot in our work is the concept of not good enough, and it seems to me that social media can bring about that sense of comparison frequently, which makes us look at our own lives and wonder if we're good enough. And there's so many more facets to evaluate if we're good enough to look like that, or to have money to buy that. And so I'm not sure of studies showing that social media increases that, but I definitely am encountering that a lot more with shame and not good enough, feeling not good enough.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. I'm not familiar with what the specifics are on the studies. My sense is that even though we say we are more kind of connected, and it's through video teleconferencing like this, oftentimes, as they say, FaceTime isn't FaceTime. We aren't as connected, I don't think, in terms of being able to really emotionally be attuned to each other, and so I would say that I think that it is a factor in a lot of people being isolated and depressed. I mean, a lot of social media is negative, and certainly there's a lot of impression management going on. There's a lot of, you go on and you see what other people have that you don't have, or something like that. A lot of comparisons are probably being made. So I don't mean to be dissing social media. It's got a lot of great qualities to it, but my guess is that it probably is a factor. And I do think that depression is on the rise. I don't know the numbers, but I do think that we are more depressed, now than we were in the past. But having said that, I think that this is an interesting time when we're in this pandemic with all kinds of potential challenges. This may be the time that we can particularly experience more connection, more healing, more ability to grow in our resilience. So yeah, I think we can still
go ahead.
Were
you good? Okay. If I could switch to another question, Dr. Stanford said that women are more susceptible to depression, and one person writing in like, why is that? And Shea, you want to take that one on, or?
Seems appropriate. I think, well, what I know is that men experience depression as more anger. So it may be that there are more equal numbers between men and women experiencing depression, but maybe women demonstrate it more in their, the way they communicate to other people. We're more likely to say something like, I don't feel good, or I'm feeling kind of lonely, feeling kind of isolated. I don't think men are maybe less socialized to say things like that or talk about feelings. So in terms of the prevalence between men and women, maybe it's just that women are more likely to talk about it. I do think So it'd be important to notice though that depression can occur after pregnancy, and that's something definitely to be aware of. And there's lots of body and brain chemistry changes after pregnancy, and so that can be a factor in women also experiencing more times of depression too.
Interesting. One person writing in is asking, how do you handle the stigma of men and depression? And first of all, do you all agree that there is a stigma for men being depressed? And if there is, how do you handle that?
I think the stigma is there. I think we're doing better with the stigma. I definitely have a number of men that I have the privilege of working. I mean, there's an initial discomfort with coming in for some of them, but I think they kind of adjust quite quickly to the process. Kind of to Shea's point, I do think that anger is definitely an issue for us as men, and we, as I've heard, instead of tears, we secrete stomach acid. So we probably have more, going on in terms of internalizing some of our emotion. I think one of the things that I'll try to emphasize with people is just the value of the range of emotion, and I think we're socialized, especially as men, not to be so valuing of certain negative emotions, sadness especially. There's a lot of ways we talk about sadness that are kind of pejorative. We talk about breaking up or falling apart, so forth. So I think society definitely has a role to play in that. But what I try to emphasize is that tears are strength. There's a Hebrew proverb that says, "Soap for the body, tears for the soul," and it's a way to cleanse, and really be genuine.
Yeah, I think unfortunately in society, you're not macho enough. If you weep, you're not macho enough if you're depressed. And that's kind of more like the world's lies. And not, obviously Jesus weeps, we know that. And obviously Jesus was depressed on the cross. My God, why have you forsaken me? That's pretty much the pit of depression. Or even in the Garden of Gethsemane, when he's actually sweating sweat of drops of blood. And and that's like the most perfect man in the world, our Lord Jesus. And so, we have to switch around some of the lies we hear in society, or even the lie for men or women, like don't tell people you're depressed, don't get help. And the healthiest people get help. And so we need to work through that. Okay, here is another question. Do genetics play a part in being susceptible to depression? Is that passed on from mom and dad, grandma, grandfather? What do you feel about that?
I think it can be passed on through genetics, and also just through social modeling too. May not be about genetics, but if I saw my mom or my dad cope with life stress by kind of just sleeping all the time, maybe that's what I do too. So I think it'd be a combination of both genetics, but also just environmental, what you're surrounded by.
Nature and nurture, I guess. Yeah, it's a both and. So okay. So if somebody's asking if I am, I'm not depressed, but I'm experiencing more and more of a blue period, as Dr. Sanford describes it. So what can I do to help myself? This person's asking.
Well, I guess I would say, again, I would commend that person for being interested in what they can do to apply our presentation this evening. And it's a good thing that it's a blue period and not a depression. And at the same time, I think there's a lot of value to being aware of why we feel what we feel. I would encourage them to I don't think there would be a problem with even seeking out a counselor, even in an early sort of intervention kind of way, because one of the things about our field is it's really accessible right now. We have a lot of support from the insurance companies and stuff for us to be able to meet with people, and there's a whole category of mental health disorders called adjustment, basically, and oftentimes I'm seeing folks who are in that category, not necessarily a major depressive episode. And so I think there's a lot of potential for them to springboard from their awareness to kind of become their personal best.
That's yeah, that's very helpful. Dr. Stanford talked about you can have an imbalance in serotonin, and what was the other one? Epinephrine.
Norepinephrine.
That's it. But how do we get that imbalance somebody's writing? How does that occur, that the imbalance happens? That's above my pay grade. One of you wonderful therapists is going to have to answer this.
Go for it, Brian. You probably know it better than I do.
Well,
you can at least pronounce the word, Shea, but I can't pronounce the word, but go ahead. Right.
I think there's probably a way in which maybe there's kind of a burnout going on. I don't know what's going on neurochemically. And I also, to your point, Dan, about nurture and nature, I tend to be more on the nurture side. So it's a chicken and egg question as far as, what's causing what. My sense is that we can actually impact our brain activity by how we think. And I do think that there's research to suggest that. And so we can see a brain issue going on and assume that that's what was the first thing to come, but it may be following what's going on cognitively. That's just my bias, and that's how I will operate in terms of believing that we can really make a difference as we change our thinking and our believing.
So nurture or nature, chemical or not, is it possible, somebody's asking, that someone can struggle with depression for so long that they eventually just adjust or adapt to it? And so while the symptoms may seem less, they're really still struggling with depression.
That's a good question.
Yeah, it is a good question.
So.
These are great questions people are writing in.
Yeah, it reminds me of that. Brian, let me know if it reminds me of dysthymia a little bit, which is like a persistent type of depression. And people do sort of live with that. And it's kind of like this mild depression that you just sort of have, like a headache kind of always in the back of your experience. But what was the second part of that question? Is it, I can't remember.
Well, that is it possible they've been with this for so long and they're kind of adjusting or adapting? Is it that the symptoms may seem less, but actually the depression is still of a deep nature?
Yeah, I think that, again, the idea that depression can be managed, right? It's sometimes like a diabetes where we always have to check in, monitor, and then you apply coping skills as needed. So for sure, I think there are times when we can lessen it by doing the things that Brian's talking about too, really managing our thoughts. And then during stressful periods, it might get a little bit more exacerbated.
Okay. I want to move to a very tender question. And again, for all of you out there, I just want to affirm you and encourage you for, coming to terms with these very tough questions and wanting to get answers, because if you want to get answers, that's wonderful. And this is the question. This person wrote, my best friend committed suicide last year, and we were very close, and I did everything possible to help her with her mental health issues, including knowing about her suicidal thoughts for 20 plus years. And this person says, I no longer want to go to places that we went to, like church or the gym, etc. And I no longer want to hang out with our shared friends. Is it healthy that I want to start over and hang out at new places and have new friends? And again, I just thank this person for just being very transparent and asking this, very authentic. But, Brian or Shea?
Yes, I want to just thank you for sharing your question and your story that way. And I think you're so courageous to have borne with your friend for as long as you did. And I'm certain your friend at this time is fine and you know, thankful for what you did. I believe that God takes care of his own, and I would say I do think it is healthy to want to be in different places that might not trigger the old memories. That's certainly important. You know, the thing that comes to mind is really what makes sense to you is really important, because you were in a situation where things weren't in your control, and it was not, it didn't make sense. And I do think that as you are able to find your sense of yourself again in the midst of this, because I'm sure a part of you is missing with your friend not being in your life now on this earth. I do believe that that will be part of your healing, is to just really allow yourself to live in the way that you would have hoped your friend would have been able to have experienced life with you. Thank you so much for sharing.
Yeah, and these questions, I love these questions. This is real life, yeah, that we're talking about it. This is you know, this is a real life laboratory talking about things. Here's one from an educator, you know, the DOE, other schools maybe opening up soon. And this person's asking, so I work with high school students. What suggestions do you have to encourage good mental health for them as they're coming back? Because many of them struggled to stay focused in school during fourth quarter, you know, babysitting siblings, household chores, and this person's worried about the upcoming school year. And it's just like, what can I do to encourage these kids who are going to come back with probably greater anxiety and other
I would
concerns?
say the first thing we want to really help adolescents and children do is to try to make sense of what's happening. We want to give them the words to understand how their thoughts and their feelings and their behaviors all tie together. So often I'll use this idea of like a three-legged stool. So I might say something like, it's something terrible has happened in our world, lots of protests and pandemic and all kinds of things out of our control. But then you link it to when we experience those things, this is what people feel, this is what they tend to do. And then you give a statement of hope. That's the third thing. So I would say really trying to give teenagers and kids just meaning for what's happening for them, because everything does feel out of their control.
Yeah. And you know, one person's writing, and I think it's one from our youth, what can a teenager do if a family can't afford counseling and the teenager really wants help? I do know health plans. I believe Kaiser offers 12 free therapy sessions, I think. And I don't know about the other ones, HMSA and others, but so it's a very good question. Here's a teenager asking, what can I do? I want counseling, but family can't afford it.
Brian, you want to go for it?
Sure. You know, sometimes people will sponsor counseling. Sometimes churches will sponsor counseling. I've been grateful for times when I would have a pastor who would say, hey, I want to come alongside this person and sort of afford a number of sessions, not necessarily unlimited. But I think there's also, sometimes you might be able to join somebody in their counseling. If there's a close friend that is already in a counseling relationship with a therapist they trust, they may be able to have you join them. And then sometimes churches have like lay counseling programs. So there are options, I think, for for people who are not necessarily working with insurance or working on a fee for service basis. But there are also, you know, people who are mentors who would, I'm sure, very privileged to take you under their wing. So I just think it might just be a matter of finding someone who's a good fit for you, and maybe sharing with somebody who doesn't, you know, sharing with somebody who has other access to resources and seeing what their ideas are as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. I'm just noticing we have so many questions, and I'm apologizing ahead of time. I'm not sure we can get to all of them, but I'm going to try and pick some from different categories, and that the rest of us can really extrapolate for ours. And here's kind of a theological question in addition to a psychological issue. Somebody wrote, I was diagnosed with bipolar in the mid-90s, and people would tell me that I just needed to pray more or plead the blood of Jesus. And this kind of advice caused me, this person saying, caused me to isolate from Christians because I found their advice well-meaning but soul-crushing. Mm. And I think this person needs really a word of advice right now. So, Shea, do you want to pick up on that one? Or?
Yeah, I would definitely. I'm appreciative of this question, and really was grateful Dr. Stanford also addressed it in his talk. It's so important to erase the stigma that we have around mental health, right? That it's a condition, and it's not a lack of faith or spiritual issue. So thanks for putting that out there. I would encourage you to continue on with your treatment and your good just coping behaviors, and yeah, really challenge that stigma that it's a spiritual issue. So
I think what I would just say is that bipolar, I think especially, is amenable and helped by medication. So just saying that someone needs to have more faith is, I think, going to miss that. I think that it isn't a matter of not having enough faith. It isn't a matter of not pleading the blood of Christ. It's a complex issue. And, it's something that must be very hard to have felt like you were told things, probably well-intended, but things that didn't connect with what you were needing at the time. And unfortunately, that happens, especially in our faith circles. I think what we want to understand is that you know, what we call weakness is where we actually experience our Lord's strength. He says his grace is sufficient for us, for his power is made perfect in weakness. But we want to get rid of the shame. That I think is a very important thing. And unfortunately, I think sometimes well-meaning people can say things that can inadvertently cause or be felt to be shameful. And I'm very sorry for that for you. I think it's really courageous for you to share that. Thank you.
It's a very, very practical question. And I don't know if like telemedicine, you do video conferencing or counseling rather. Somebody's asking, do you find that during this COVID-19 time, your practice is harder because of social distancing? And so part of this, maybe this person saying, how do we have access to therapy? Our therapists not seeing anybody because of this. Either of you want to take that on?
Yeah, I'll say lots of therapists went on to telehealth, is what it's called, which is like a video platform. And while it's definitely different from in-person, it's very effective. I found, you know, while there's just some technical issues sometimes, there's really not too much change in the ability to connect and to diagnose and to treat someone. So I'd encourage that person to not to let that stop you, but yeah, lots of therapists and clinics are offering telehealth, and very successfully as well.
Yeah, that's been my experience as well. In fact, I would say that I'm busier. I'm very grateful for the opportunities that I have to work with the people that I do, and One of the things that I think is actually a factor is I'm actually more accessible because I can schedule a little bit later, a little bit earlier, because I'm, you know, really close to where I'm working from.
No drive time.
No commute time, and it saves time too, because if you know, working from home, I'm not having to like disinfect the office in between sessions, and it's nice not to have to wear a mask and so forth. So, and again, insurance companies right now, I think, are quite supportive of it. Some insurance companies have actually done away with co-pays and such. So it's a really encouraging thing to see. You know.
Yeah, and by the way, somebody wrote in a social worker for the state wanted to let people know that the person who said they couldn't afford therapy right now, that if they have Quest insurance, except for the Kaiser plan, according to this person, they can apply for mental health services from the State Department of Health, and they can have mental health services for adults and children. So that is what one social worker has written in to help the other person who had asked that question. And is there, how do you help people who are being depressed, but how do we, I don't know if the word is convince them or suggest to them that they should get counseling or should get help? And that's very delicate, isn't it?
I think it can be. Sometimes a depressed person probably might not respond to like you should, you know. I think I said this a little bit last night, but just to really try to understand what's underneath their reluctance to go to therapy, or maybe why they're depressed, that you have a better chance of connecting to somebody, or if you're trying to understand what's happening for them rather than telling them what to do.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that
go ahead.
Excuse me. I think that they would benefit to the extent that it made sense to them. So if it's not yet making sense to them, I think it would be just good to talk with them about what does, and then maybe the conversation will come back around to what their felt need might be that might line up with seeking services. Of course, if it's a safety concern, then I would want to make sure that more was done, you know, to try to facilitate them being able to have some support, even if it meant going with them to the ER or something like that, if that's possible.
And another very good question is, how should we handle a situation where we do suffer serious depression and you know your children recognize it? How should we help our children understand what we're going through? I think this is a very great, wonderful question.
It's a great question, and so important for that parents asking that, and they sound very gracious. I think the one thing that I would say is to really offer that child a sense of safety, though, that you know, mommy or daddy may be feeling down or sad, but that's not your fault, and to always offer that sense of I'm always here for you, and to offer that sense of connection. So I would encourage them not to really focus on the child's sense of safety.
And I would just want to listen to the child in terms of how they felt about the situation. I wouldn't want it to be a thing that the parent would have to be ashamed of to the child. If anything, I think the child would benefit from that kind of honesty on the parent's part. But we would want to be careful not to have the child become the parent's sort of confidant. And so I think we want to be able to attend the child's emotions and just, you know, be open to whatever those are. That's such a big part of it.
And related to that question, how do you introduce your child's condition to your child's friends if he or she is having a difficult time? Again, there could be stigmas or whatever, so how can you bridge that communication in a sensitive way?
Well, I think I would want to connect with what might be going on my child's friends' lives. Perhaps they also have areas of frustration or struggle, disappointment that would help them to be able to like relate to what my child is going through. And again, to try to minimize any stigma, I would sort of applaud or commend that whole interaction taking place. I think that that's a lot. Takes a lot of courage again.
Yeah, yeah. And finally, just one very practical question. I think it's a great question. Are there chemical tests to assess and diagnose depression?
Oh, it's a good question. I'm not aware of any. Brian, are you?
I don't think so. I don't think you get like a blood test and then you see, you know, whether the neurotransmitter levels are high or low.
Yeah.
A useful
Yeah, but a great question.
Mm-hmm.
Great question. And I wish, you know, like COVID, we could put something on our skin or up our nose or something and figure out if we're depressed or like a thermometer. But yeah, thank you. So let me just say, all of you asked such wonderful questions and so helpful, not only for you, but for everybody who's listening in, that maybe nearly 1,000 or whatever. And so grateful for all of your questions. And I apologize again, we just couldn't get to all of them. There's so many coming in. And my wonderful assistants are trying to, you know, collate them and call some to get them over to me. I want to say tomorrow, you know, if you have friends and you're thinking, man, I think they should come in on this and sign up, you can sign up tonight. You know, between last night and tonight, another 50 people signed up, and maybe people were saying, oh man, this is very helpful, we got to tell our friends. And again, it's free, so please, you know, if this can help the community, we really want people to be helped. And I really want to thank our partners, NAMI, the National Association, I can't remember all the name, Alliance of Mental Illness, and also Matt Stanford's Health and Hope and Health Christian Institute in Houston, and Logos Bookstore has made Dr. Stanford's books available, along with other books on mental health. So please drop by there or give them a call or email them to ask them about those titles or other titles that I mentioned. And you know, Hawaiian Ministries brought you this important information for free, and we would love it if you feel so moved to give a donation to HIM so we could do more of these. And actually, we do hope to do one, maybe one a month. I think the next one's on burnout for people who are leaders of an organization or pastors, because we think there could possibly be more burnout because this COVID coronavirus thing has been so hard. And we're, you know, let's say churches are doing online, they're doing also in person, they're trying to do all their groups online, and for everybody else. So Jeff Schulte will be part of that. Tomorrow, Matt Stanford will be with us live first after each of the talks. Those will still be recorded, and then he's going to come on live after each of them to answer questions. So that will be a new thing. Also, there's a chance, you know, you may think, I don't want to give a donation to HIM, which is great, but you might want to give a donation to the food pantry, and that's available too. And so you'll see the slide at the very end for either of those if you want to help the community in that specific way. So a thanks to Dr. Stanford, but a thank you to Brian and Shea for putting on these long hours. Shea for 2 nights in a row. So grateful for all of you.